Mary, you're gonna work on a nice thing real quick. I can barely hear you talking, but I think you know. Again. I know, it was not funny, but my grandson graduated. From high school. I'm old enough to sit there and call. You got it all way.
How about now, Steve? Can you hear us now?
Yep.
Steve, can you hear us? Could you give us a little indication of, I guess
Yep,
we
I
can't
can hear
hear
you.
you if you're speaking.
I can hear you.
We can't hear you.
I can keep saying a few things just to test. Testing, testing.
Hey, Steve, can you try it now?
Yep. Yeah, and I was hearing you there. You were coming through, Jerry.
This might have been happening next.
Testing, testing. I'll try my other microphones too, just in
On this
case.
side, Steve.
Say again, Jerry. Testing, testing.
Steve, say something for us, will you?
Yep, testing. Can you hear me? I am talking, but I don't know if you can hear me.
Still up.
We can hear you on YouTube, Steve. Give us just 1 second to troubleshoot. No, please take.
Okay, can you hear me now?
On the off chance it's just Steve, could you speak if you can? Try to speak.
All right, Steve, give us one more try.
Okie dokie, can you hear me now?
That's all right. We still can't hear you on Zoom.
This one. Yeah.
All right, Steve, now try one more time.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Do you really want it up?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, just fine.
This one goes to that.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, we can get started. We are live, that was all so live. Yeah.
So we can start now, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna call this meeting of the planning commission to order. It's June 10th. It's 4:40 and the first item is citizens to be heard. If we have any citizens to be heard. I don't think I see any trying to be heard. Okay, are there any ex parte communications or disclosures? Okay, and I should also make sure we have roll correctly. So we have Aaron, we have Jerry and Obi here. We have Steve online, and I think we don't have Mary. Is that right? Okay. First item, approval of the minutes. I'll move to minutes as written. Yeah. So, okay. Tony moves and Jerry seconds. Any discussion? All in favor?
Hi.
That's everybody. Okay, Trish is up with a county commission report.
I don't really have anything. We have that joint meeting, and so we'll probably discuss that a little bit, but nothing spectacular since that time. We passed the Tahada extension, and I think that was about it.
Yeah, there was.
It was pretty slim, because other than our joint meeting, so yeah. Questions?
Any questions? Thank you, Trish. And I guess the first discussion item is a recap of the planning commission, county commission workshop on June 4th. Sure, discussion. Yeah. I volunteer. That'll teach you. Never again. Well, I don't know. I thought it was a really good meeting, actually. So further down in the notes on page. It's page 5 for those of you that have the notes open. There are, I took some minutes or notes during the meeting, and there were these 5 bullets in here that I sent down to Lisa to add to the discussion. And so I'm guessing some of you also had other comments as well. I think this would be a good forum to kind of hash out what we talked about and see if there's some common ground for moving ahead. The first one is the idea of using overlay zones as a way to regulate the development of the intensive uses. And I thought that was a good, positive idea. Any discussion on that?
I would ask staff, knowing in my experience how laborious overlay zones are. Overlay zones, just like that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like a future land use map all over again, and you're gonna have 24 of them. I imagine you need some added resource or capacity if we wanted to implement that, and I imagine it would be substantial. But
Yeah.
What do you think?
I would say as a starting point, probably the only one that was brought up at that workshop and that I've heard from before from the commissioner is simply taking major utilities out of the use table and putting that in overlay zone as a way to, because that really, those major utilities, as we know, can have such huge impacts, significant changes to the lay of the land in our growth pattern. So I think that at least starting with that one would be a good place to go, and then we could think about some other ones. But this conversation definitely relates to some of the other commercial or kind of like light industrial type uses that we don't really have very good places for in the valley. Like we don't have a lot of any light industrial zoning or heavy industrial, except for out at Cisco. But like in the valley, you know, for something to come in that was only allowed in light industrial, it might be kind of an essential service, but would have a large impact and wouldn't necessarily be good next to residential. It's really hard to find a place in the valley for a carve out that would work for stuff like that. And so, I mean, like right now, you know, that we had an application in, started out as like a gas station out at Crescent Junction, and then they kind of were talking about leaning towards a truck stop, and then we had to say, whoa, that's not, like, it kind of makes sense maybe out at the junction, but it's actually not permitted in highway commercial zoning. And so it's like, well, where do we ever want to see a truck stop anywhere in the county, or is that just intentionally left out by way of, so that's kind of getting a little bit off track. But
I would also think, and you're right, time spent in the Triassic wood shop and other, you know, there's not a ton of like light industrial. This has a, you know, string of the spider web in economic development and in workforce housing. Light industrial is a vacancy in our community. A big part of enabling light industrial manufacturing, things like that, you need larger and greater utility services, particularly water, electric, three-phase electric, and much larger volumes of water in order to make those things happen. So I think an overlay zone planned industrial scale utilities, like, we don't want to put the cart before the horse, right? One's going to have to inform the other. You can designate this as a light industrial zone, but if there is no incentive for a utility to establish right of way and easement to that series of lots, then there will never be any industry there, because you need to have larger, like, greater utilities. Anyway,
right.
So to reiterate what you're saying, I think that's a smart track forward to prioritize figuring out utility overlay zone.
Yeah, utilities, and then light industrial could even be another overlay, possibly, just so that we have some options for that, because right now it's just not located anywhere. Okay.
OB, could I chime in just on this point, just to
Yes,
throw something out there?
yes.
Just to throw in my 2 cents. I know we're not making any decisions on this, but I just want to bring it up to put it on people's radars, and it's just a perspective. You know, when I look at overlay zones, you know, I think they serve a purpose. I guess kind of just a word of caution with being reliant on the overlay zones is that it increases the number of steps that are involved with getting towards really any sort of project being accomplished, whether that's, you know, you have the potential of something being in an overlay zone, but let's say a new purchaser wanted to buy a lot with this vision of something that, you know, perhaps helps our county, right? So they're kind of on I put them on the good, the positive side of the spectrum of a would-be developer. Every single additional step that you add into that process, I think tips the scale more towards failure for a project because you add on the time, especially when you add in planning commission, county commission, a couple people don't show up and there's no meeting. Now you're adding weeks, months to a project. And in that time, the winds of change come and it just doesn't happen anymore. Or you backlog it or you push it off so much that the prices tend really only to go up. And so now all of a sudden, something that was formerly viable is no longer viable. So I would just advocate for limiting the overlay zones, except for in like the absolute essential sort of situations. And I don't, that would be probably for the county commission or just, these bodies to really decide. But if we use overlay zones as a way to kind of have the legislative approval on everything in terms of development or as many things as possible, then I think ultimately things just aren't ever going to happen. And if that's what the community wants, that's what the community wants. But I think it's disingenuous at a time where we say, hey, we want to solve this thing, let's make it an overlay legislative approval, and we inadvertently kill any of the projects that we say we want to progress towards. So just a word of caution there. I'll get off my soapbox. Thanks.
And I would agree with that. I would say this kind of light industrial and major utilities might be one of those exceptions for an overlay because they are such impactful projects, but you wouldn't want tons of things to have overlays. My 2 cents.
Yeah, I personally would like to stay away from overlays, but in more relying on the future land use plan and the future land use map for designating specific areas for things like light industrial. And we are working on that. We're trying, it's been tricky trying to actually, that's why I brought it up, is because it's been quite an exercise to try to find anywhere in the valley where it would be appropriate to designate as a future land use light industrial uses, because there's just so much residential that's been already built out all over. So it's like you almost can't find anywhere where there's like a carve out where if it was like up against some sitla land, there's like a couple little pockets like that could work, but it's pretty minimal. But I do agree, like overlays can be super complicated to design in terms of the criteria and creating the standards and how to guide the decision makers on how to approve those. And then they can also just be very arduous for the developer and the property owner. So yeah, we wouldn't want to go too crazy. Just really reserve that tool for things that are very limited.
Any other comments? Jerry's on to number 2.
Right, on to number 2. So this one actually ends up being a question, but we talked a bit about enhancing the commercial zoning districts to encourage economic diversification and mitigate the impacts of intense commercial activities and the impact on residential neighborhoods. And the question was, how much of this should we work through the future land use plan?
Process things really like for staff. I particularly on this subject, economic opportunity development and diversification. Big buzzwords. Our planning commission tries to solve a lot of that stuff. We also have like 2 or 3 other committees that specifically that. I don't know the nuts and bolts of the future land use plan and the general plan, but I imagine internally at the county we have a planning team or a steering committee or something like that. There should be some ITC, some interdisciplinary type, I would ask folks at economic development, how they think that might work.
And I have.
I'm sure you, you know, so that,
Yeah.
for the sake of this discussion, I
Yeah.
would not presume to act like the economic development expert. I'm sure you're talking to the people.
No, and that's a really good point though, because sometimes it doesn't get brought up or it's not known that planning and zoning has a representative. I'm not a voting member on the economic diversity, or I think it's called the. Yeah, it's EDAB. What do they call themselves now? Though they were renaming it, but it was the Economic Diversification Advisory Board or Economic Development Advisory Board. Anyway, they are a great, really smart group of people, and they have exciting things and that they're always talking about. And there are times where what's on their agenda does overlap with planning and future land use. So I think there's a great opportunity to loop them in more with the future land use planning. And I've been wanting to make sure that that happens for sure. Because they do talk about the constraints of our current, just the property values and the difficulty of entry to some of those commercial properties for small businesses. So yeah, there should be some strong communication and overlap with that body for sure.
Yeah, if I had the economic development experience to advise that question, I wouldn't be so conservative.
So it sounds like at least the action there is just for the economic development board. They've probably already been actively working in it.
Yeah, there's been some recent discussions at their meetings that definitely lean towards where I feel like I could jump in, but there's too much going on at that moment. But where I think in the future they should be part of like our land use steering committee, or they should have a representative there working on the future land use map when it gets close. So yeah, that will definitely happen.
Any more on the second vote? This actually came up from a couple of the council members. Doing the math, understand the net balance of reducing the residential density in highway commercial and increasing it in residential areas. And implementation of residential density bonus incentives. And it kind of was tied in with the bullet number 4 as well, which was, Aaron, actually, this was a thought that you brought up, when you brought it up, I thought, that makes a lot of sense. That was overstory residential and highway commercial, as well as in the rear of the highway commercial properties. I remember bringing that up.
Yeah. To me, there's a certain thing where it's like, oh, do you just reinvent the idea of a downtown? Right? Like, I keep looking at the highway commercial and what we kind of have going out there. It's kind of like this. I mean, you have this front-facing highway commercial, which I envision as like big box stores. Then right behind it is we're putting in these dense neighborhoods like Arroyo Crossing. So can we have like a party in the front, business in the back kind of thing? Like some kind of like, that's where we were starting to talk about, well, if you decrease, and Bill brought up a good point, like, do we really want to like decrease housing things? And I'm like, well, is it kind of the idea is to go up instead of like ban something on that or reduce it? So it's like, well, one of our objectives is to maintain or increase property values. Where's the most expensive property value in the county or in the city? It's like the downtown. So it's like, and what I just keep thinking whenever I go to towns and stuff, it's like, we're gonna have these highway commercial that are just vast expanses of parking lots that aren't walkable. But if the back of it was, and the back is like, yeah, store in the front, but like community residential or neighborhood commercial in the back. I mean, some of these highway commercial things I was looking at, like they're, you know, we were talking about split zoning and stuff, and I'm like, can we split zone it more for like a backwards facing community thing?
I agree with you very much in my heart, man. Spending a lot of time working in big box stores as a kid. My question is, where does shipping and receiving go?
Yeah,
You've
Oh,
got to
yeah.
be able to spit around an 18-wheeler, dog.
Right.
That's all that shit that's going on. I apologize. All that stuff that's it's been a very long day. All that stuff that's been going on in the back has got to go somewhere. If it's
Yeah.
not in the back, it's gonna go in
Yeah,
the
that's
front. There's 7 18-wheelers. You gotta have
Yeah.
88 feet to spin them around. You gotta have loading docks. You gotta
No,
have sink. You gotta.
it's true. And so then you have to think like, what do we want our highway corridor to kind of look like? Do we care? Probably. And then also, but Aaron, you bring up like, I would have had that exact same thought of kind of brainstorming in my mind how it could work along the highway, and that exact idea came across my mind. Like, could we make like a requirement to have like your building actually faced the residential, and like all of there was like a little street that could kind of, but we're already doing the frontage roads right there along the highway. So I guess for that section anyway, it probably
down
makes
zone
sense.
highway commercial, the general business is not an option. Like, I don't know.
I know, it's tricky. Yeah.
And I,
I'm gonna bring up the word beaver again, hopefully. But I was recently in Beaver, Utah,
Oh, nice.
and it was interesting because there were second or third stories. I think one was actually, I mean, all along Main Street, and then in the back were these apartment buildings, like of all along Main. It was pretty cool, and I was like, that's what we need,
Right? Yeah.
right? I mean, it was
Yeah.
old. You could tell the planning was old, but it was
Yeah.
dense. So they were using that storefront, but all the back and the upper stories you could tell were residential.
Right. Yeah.
So it was interesting.
Yeah. And I think right now on the future land use map, we do have some of that where we're trying to put in the buffer zone between highway commercial and low density residential would be like a multifamily
Yeah.
designation. Yeah.
well, I have actually 2 thoughts. One is when I was in Eugene, they really wanted their downtown to have some businesses on the bottom and residential on top, and they would think of a place like Berkeley, for instance, right? Which we probably never were going to be. But the other idea I have is you don't necessarily have to make it so highway commercial doesn't have a fair density, but you could treat highway commercial like these other places, these small lot residentials where we say, gee, you can put some extra houses on, but they've got to be for workers and for affordable housing, whichever way you go or both ways you go, they can get right back up to 18 units, but they'd be good for helping our affordable housing problem.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And that was kind of what Commissioner Walker was stating would be his preference was to just essentially for this land use code update, take out the 18 units per acre of residential from highway commercial. And then through the future land use plan, we can go in and say, okay, now here's our density bonus program for this higher density that would essentially place it in the same area that it was being removed, but then it would be an opportunity to incentivize like primary residency or something like that.
That would do the math.
Mm-hmm. As far as the build out study goes, this has been something that I've envisioned would happen, like where we would have a final build out study that would compare what the original build out for the current zoning is. And I did that build out study about a year ago, I think maybe a little bit longer ago, but and it is pretty shocking to see the amount of units that would be allowed if we just built everything out to what the current density is. And so we would have to be very cognizant of not going too far in increasing density in all these different areas, but then not balancing that out with some lower density areas, like taking some of that density back down. So yes, this isn't the build out study that would happen based on the future land use plan would not be something that the current consultants have in their scope of work. It's not in there. But it would be either something that we could have it contracted out, or we could try, depending on the staff situation at the time, try to model it, the build out study that I did originally with our current zoning. But I think it's definitely something we would want to do. And I think it could even be something we talk about in the future land use chapter, or the land use chapter itself in the general plan is something like a tool that we should always be implementing.
So Lisa, if I heard you right, I think what you're saying, what you said was in the work that we've already got scoped for the consultants, the build out is not a part of that, but potentially we could add it in at some point.
Yes.
And it might be a good thing to earmark just so that we remember to do that, right? I think it is an important part.
It is very important. And we would want to know that we would definitely want to know the difference between those numbers and make sure we weren't over allocating density that, could have impact on our water and all kinds of things. So, yep.
Tony, I had a question on the big box too. I think that, and I know you raised a really good point. It's some of this is just going to be impossible to do depending on who builds what where. But that highway commercial zone is humongous, and I can't imagine it at all go to work like that. So I guess that
I was
thought that was
as Darren was talking, I was imagining a scenario like we're seeing the development happen at around Point of the Mountain and Spanish Fork, and drive through that area and build something like that, and then try to put what is likely to be higher density housing, not going to be large houses in that,
right.
If you think a UTV is loud, wait until receiving day happens on Saturday morning at 2:00, right?
Yeah.
It's a thing. So it's not like, it's not going to be the entire strip. But it's also, light industrial, highway commercial is still very much highway and industrial are capital words in those names. So we just got to make sure people know what we're talking about. Be fair in front of people. I like, there's a lot of talk about reinventing downtowns, and I'm as a thinker, my logic really builds on prior experience and the sequences that took us to get here. We have developed the downtowns we have because we've tried other downtowns before and they don't work out too well. Scranton, Pennsylvania, and other places where you've got a rubber latex foam factory in the middle of the neighborhood, and it's working. Like there's environmental things, air quality, noise pollution, and it's like we've segregated our zoning to a degree because of values. It was not arbitrary, and reintegrating zoning is not going like we're going to have to consider the values that caused us the segregation as a society in the first place. Right? And that's just my point about the loading of this thing. To get to that, it's like, okay, so that's a big conversation. It's not like I am not going to have those solutions. I just got to point at the problem.
I actually think that one of the biggest reasons we hired the consultants is to kind of help us grapple with these questions. So just putting that up there.
Can I ask a quick question just to verify? With this would be for you, Elisa, or anyone on staff, and I just wanted to confirm that with the future land use map and like the density bonus system that's being created, or being proposed, that's all like an administrative process. Is that right? Like, you're in this zone or this area, and so if you adhere to this criteria, then you can increase density up to X number of units per acre. Is that correct? Could you just verify that? Or set me straight if that's
So,
wrong?
I think it's actually something we're still trying to work out. It would be, in my mind, the future land use map designates areas, it'll be designating areas for higher density up to a certain number, like based on where the location is. If like, for instance, there's gonna be a few little areas, like a handful of areas that might be appropriate to go all the way up to 45 units per acre. And then there are gonna be areas that are more appropriate for like that MFR 18. And that would be the max that you could go up to. So this is the way I've been thinking about it with this is actually coming from the previous consultants we were working with, BAE Urban Economics, who have been just wrapping up their final deliverable to give us those the development pro formas to show what kind of the feasibility is for each of these different housing prototypes and different densities, and how we can fit in certain incentives and density bonuses. So I do want to share that deliverable with the Planning Commission. I think it'll be the next meeting. We're kind of just still wrapping up. There were a couple of things we wanted to add to the final report to have them look at. So we're finishing that up. But essentially, their suggestion was to say that this density bonus incentive would be something where the developer could decide how they want to work that incentive. Like the future land use map designates, like I said, somewhere where 18 units is the max, 18 units, dwelling units per acre is the max density that you could go. They could decide, well, it actually only pencils out for us to use the incentive up to like 10 units per acre for this property. They wouldn't have to build to 18. But they could if they wanted to. So it's just kind of building in some flexibility. But they would have to go through a rezone, I believe, or an overlay. That part we haven't worked out. I don't know how you would go if you were to have it like an administrative process, like you're talking about. That would mean actually going in and changing the zoning map, like the county going in and applying like density bonus overlays in certain areas. You know what I mean? Because that would take care of the legislative change. At some point, you have to have a legislative change in order to change the entitlement to a property, and that would be the zoning. You know what I mean? So I think it's probably cleaner to have it just those areas are identified in the general plan on the future land use plan map, and then people can come in and apply for the higher density bonus overlay for whatever density, that is designated on the map. Does that make sense?
A little bit. I'm still a little bit confused. I'm hearing both things where it could possibly be administrative, but it's also still going to need some legislative approval. And I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're saying either like the legislative approval would happen. It could happen either beforehand, which is almost like changing the zoning. So that way it is just purely they could apply for it and it's administrative, or if the administrator can't make the decision, then it does have to go through the legislative process, and whether that's planning commission and county commission, I wouldn't be sure on that. Is that?
Well, yeah, that's exactly what it would be. So the other, I don't think that we've talked about so far. I don't think we've been thinking about the first scenario where what you were just saying about actually going in and changing the zoning map to show these areas of higher density bonus incentive opportunities on the zoning map. I don't think we've been going in that direction. I suppose it could be a conversation still at this point, but the way that we have been thinking about it is more that it would be incremental. Property owners would come in and they would apply for a rezone to this higher density overlay or whatever, if it, even if it's a actual zone that replaces the underlying zone, that would be something to also decide. It could be an overlay or it could be just a zone change. You know what I mean?
I would, as a matter of just like civics and federalism and governance, say that like taking legislative action and making zone changes that have not been brought up by the landowner, the title holder, is a slippery slope. Like nobody, that's not gonna fly. So I mean, like it would be nice to have like some of the administrative just right through, but to just start drawing and taking large legislative actions on top of multiple parcels is, you know, that,
Yeah,
that's not that is non-stop. Like through that door, that's a non-starter. Like that's not going to happen.
Right.
But-
Yeah.
But, yeah, my recollection is what we did with the high density housing overlay.
It's very
And
simple.
it was very difficult. I mean, because
Yeah. Look at HDHO.
that you could apply for this
Yeah.
if you wanted to do it, but that's got its burdens.
Well, and that's where the future land use map is basically like the it would be acting like the HDHO eligibility map.
HDHO diet.
I want to ask just a follow-up question on this and hear what staff's perspective would be on kind of what just in sharing what I've identified as a pretty consistent issue with when we do have situations that whether it's a rezone or what have you, if it's going through the legislative process, this is, you know, I'll try to be as succinct as I can here, but what I see as being a consistent issue is when there's an idea for a project. I've heard this time and again from commissioners at both PC and county commission where someone says, "Ooh, I really like this project. I really like this idea." And we get sometimes the public clamor amounts to 3 to 15 people in opposition. And when we're so used to hearing almost nothing, like it's radio silence. I can't remember the last time we had a public comment at the planning commission. So when we go from hearing nothing to, 3 to 15 very vocal people, I think that there's like an emotional connection to that, and it's quite jarring. And so what happens then is we kind of get into this, like, I'll say this like kind of NIMBY mindset where it's like, oh, well, this is a great project, just not right here. And in our county, we don't have options for elsewhere. And so if this is like the one location where someone's coming to the table to say, hey, we could make this thing happen here, oftentimes, right? Like a housing project, for instance. Oh, well, I like it. Let's go somewhere else. Well, there's just not another elsewhere. And so if we're looking at, hopefully this future land use map as a possible solution, like what can we do, I think, for the good of everybody, for the citizen, for the people that sit on the commissions that have to make these like gut-wrenching decisions. Like what can we do to make it easier? Because it's a bummer. I'm certainly not meaning to point any fingers here at all, but my hunch is at times there's definitely relationships at play here, right? When you have a small town and you've got, I'm actually pretty close with so and so, and they're really against this. I mean, I've heard multiple commissioners of former planning commission, county commission, that they have former friends who don't talk with them anymore because they had to make a tough decision. So why don't we do everybody the favor, citizen, and government representative alike, and kind of cut through like those types of decisions that I'm talking about, and just make it as black and white as possible. Because what I'm hearing is that it may not go totally administrative, and that's why I err on that side. Is it's just like, hey, here are the goalposts. Like we're not moving them based on who showed up to a meeting, and whenever that changes, which can be kind of frequent if you look at each layer. So, anyways, that's I guess that just voicing my concern there and advocating for how can we take out the unwarranted pain from decision making.
Oh, I definitely hear you. And I would just reiterate that that's one of the, probably the most important reasons for doing a future land use plan and a future land use map is to make those decisions on a map and say, this is what, as a, you know, as best as we could come to consensus with the community and the decision makers, this is what we envision for development in the valley. And here's where the density should go. And so when a rezone application does come in, it's should be a very much more clear decision-making, easy decision-making process. If it aligns with the map, then it should get approved. If it doesn't, then it's probably like, you know, more likely to kind of debate it. But I don't know, now that I'm kind of thinking about it, like legally, if we could make the process of the density bonus incentive administrative based on a general plan map. I don't know, I would have to probably like ask our legal folks about that. I could see it maybe being I could see that it would be, you know, more streamlined, and it could be a nice way to go. I just don't know if it could work legally. So we could find out.
I agree with you. That's what I was saying. Like, I don't think that in place. Just that way. People have to ask.
Right.
Like, this.
But do you
Because
have
it's a big decision.
Tony, do you have concerns about the direction of the future land use map where it sets possibilities for landowner driven change?
No, I wouldn't say I have concerns about where it sets possibilities for landowner driven change. I think that the planning commission is a very suitable whipping post for when development's still working. Is what I'm saying. Like this county specifically has a multi-century year tradition of dashed hopes and dreams. Like apples, peaches, uranium, gondolas. Like, come on, guys. We're all here because we want to make the world a better place, but let's not like Atlas shrugged. Yeah.
Well, some of that's coming back too. It's gonna Hey, it is what it is.
You're right.
I mean,
I'm just like, you know,
we're talking about uranium in DC, so
Yeah.
it's gonna come from something.
no, I just mean to say, like, I don't want I particularly don't want staff, the other people on this board, to like, you know, feel like there is a golden goose somewhere in the land use code that's like, oh, if we just had one more overlay, if we just had one more plan revision, if we just hired one more consultant, if we just built one more lane of highway, that's not how it works. We have absolutely no reason to feel like, you know, Shangri-La is on the other side of, I love the work that Elisa is doing and I have absolute faith in it, but let's not live and die on this thing and let's get more problems, say, well, it's because the HDHO didn't work out. Come on.
But I think
well, I didn't build that $20 million project because of that little checkbox in the Excel spreadsheet. That's what did it.
but on the other hand, incremental change tends to be effective.
It is.
Yes.
But it is incremental.
It
It is.
But I think
That's
that-
the capital I.
that plan, the future land use plan, is the incremental change.
It's an increment.
You know, that's another thing that surprised me about the commissioners is two of the commissioners actually seemed, at least two seemed not clear about how it would work. And I think that's something we need to take some effort to make sure they understand, because their view of it was that we were going to go through and recommend a bunch of zoning changes, which we're not, right? It's landowner driven, as I think what we've all agreed on here. And I think that needs to be made more clear so that they go into the next meeting understanding the direction that we're looking at. go.
I do
don't know.
feel like we have gone, I feel like I'm a broken record when I have to explain that this is the general plan and the distinction between, we're not messing with the zoning map. That's landowner driven. I think there has been some talk though from other commissioners. They would probably want to explore some actual zone changes, maybe. I don't, so there's probably the fear of that, but, or a concern or whatever, but I think, yeah, it has been explained to the commission. It's been such a long process though, that it's kind of a long time passed between when we talk about it and then we bring it back, and I think maybe it just gets lost in the next translation.
But Lisa, we have a good opportunity to reinforce that again with the consultants we're bringing in.
Exactly.
But my experience is all corporate, right? It's not government, but there's something I see very much in common with the people who are further up the management chain in corporate and the county commission. That is, the people get hit with things from a million different directions, and their attention span is about 2 seconds. And so the way that I handled that in corporate America was at the beginning of those meetings, I put the stuff up in very simple terms in black and white and said, this is what we're talking about, and make very clear they understand.
Yeah.
And if they don't, get that right, get that fixed right off. the
Right.
bat.
No, that's a really good.
It surprised
suggestion.
me the level of understanding that they didn't have.
Yeah.
I would just add, incremental change was really wonderful at our last meeting, where I guess it was 7 kind of affordable worker housing out of this incentive program. And I mean, that's the kind of small progress you make, but of course it's really important.
It's perfect.
Oh, thank you. It's fine. You're part of the.
Jerry, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think, when you look at the county commission, for example, we are drinking from a fire hose at all times. And the bummer about it is it revolves every 4 years, right? So to be honest, like I feel like I'm 3.5 years in and I'm just getting my feet under me. And so, it's just this ever changing, ever evolving. And then I think everybody kind of has their niche, right? Like I'm more interested in natural resources, for example. But I think that idea of just reiterating, I know you say it again and again and again, but I think it's really important to bring it back to those really the basics.
Right, and lead with that, yeah.
Right.
And actually, we have a meeting tomorrow, our little recurring meeting with the consultants, and we are gonna discuss how it's gonna go when they come and actually meet with you all, and I can definitely bring that up and just make sure that they're kind of setting the stage and kind of making sure that there's no misunderstanding of what the process is.
And I guess to kind of put the icing on the cake, that's to me how important, why the planning commission is so important, because your recommendations that come to the county commission should be followed in my mind, right? Like you guys, this is your forte and you have that knowledge, and you're advisors to us. So my opinion.
And if it's not, I think we need to look back at both sides and see.
Right.
I think in the case of what happened here in the working meeting, it was pure misunderstanding. That's all.
Right.
And if we would have gone to the commission with that misunderstanding in place for whatever in the future, there's a good chance the wrong thing would have happened. Right? We don't want that to happen. It's a lot of work and it's the right thing too.
Yeah. Very true.
There was one dot left if we're done.
There it is. And I'm gonna add a dot after it. So yeah.
Go ahead if you want to. All right, we'll hear your dot. All right, well, it's the last one on the list here. That is the version of the future land use map proposes encouraging general business zoning along each side where the frontage roads are proposed. But how does that impact the ability for other things like gas stations, auto repair, towing, and balance?
Yeah, so I think this was something I might have expanded on one of your thoughts, Jerry, but I have been kind of grappling with this idea and inspired by the fact that the frontage roads are coming, but also wanting to just be careful that we balance the whatever decision we end up going with for the future land use map along the frontage roads. It's easy to kind of envision something broad, like a big change, but then forget that, what are the, I guess, consequences of that. And so I've just been going through my own process of trying to be cognizant of the impacts of what that whole stretch of highway could look like, and proposing different things. And so we talk about it a lot at our staff meetings, because we have applications coming in for different things like gas stations and auto repair and towing and impound lots. And we, we just want to make sure that we can still accommodate those businesses and not push them out. So there's definitely some opportunities to kind of be more nuanced, I guess. And in looking at that, I was kind of playing around with the map today and seeing that on the rim side of Highway 191, there already is like a big swath of what kind of looks like almost light industrial. It's kind of over right across from Resource Boulevard. Like before you get to Resource Boulevard on that right side, it's almost a perfect opportunity to keep that side preserved as highway commercial, even though it's got frontage road. But like maybe that's okay. We can kind of break it up there. And so I'm really trying to pay attention to what's on the ground. That's why we did the land use inventory originally. And so we're going to be using that land use inventory a lot more going into this, making these decisions. But that was just something I wanted to kind of bring up as a point that we kind of came out of that workshop, I guess, for me.
Yeah, we did have a little bit of a discussion about that, and light industrial kind of at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna ask, are we, I feel like so much of that really gets, like, we're gonna need to know the exact and specific details of the frontage roads, their length, their width, the way they're bid, how they're gonna like terminate, like, has UDOT been forthcoming, helpful, letting you know what they're gonna build, or did they just send a green stripe?
No, that green stripe was something that I just made really quickly.
Right.
They have an actual alignment with, they did a concept study, and they had a few different scenarios, and they picked one that was the preferred scenario. And it details out like the widths, where the shared use pathway would go in relation to the frontage road. There were two different ideas of whether it should go in between the highway and the frontage road, or if it should be on the other side next to the fronting the lots. And yeah, I can share that.
But
to share that.
Like this is UDOT's getting you the information you need to feel confident.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, there's definitely more. We would love to see more like getting closer to more of an engineered plan design.
That's what I mean. We like,
yeah.
Until I see something with an engineer's stamp on it, the
Right.
application is being done.
Yeah.
Right.
I know.
And I know they're not applying anything here. It's just using a metaphor.
Right.
When like so much of that, like once you spend money on the engineer's stamp, now you're committed to building it the way they do.
Yeah.
But until you've spent that money, you're gonna change your mind 5 ways from Sunday depending on the cost. And so it's like we're like don't want to make anybody feel like they're being forced to be a cat chasing their tail as UDOT comes up with their plan for the strike, because we're either going to help them inform it or they're going to inform us of what they're doing. Either of those things is going to happen before we get a clear picture of how those lots are presented.
Yeah, we're definitely asking like more and more in our communications with UDOT is we're continuing to bring up that we would like to get those plans sooner than later.
I've talked with
yeah.
like, building and engineering before. Do you guys have access or a profile with, what they call the Resource Development and Coordinating Committee? Is a mailing list that comes out on Mondays. It's typically land management stuff, but a lot of times like right of way and stream alteration work will pop up on this listserv,
Okay.
and they let you know when they've made an official decision on things. Not necessarily UDOT nearly that much is on there,
Oh,
but sometimes when you UDOT think is happening and it affects.
Yeah.
Anyway,
good to know.
we can circle back and I can show you how to get into that. But that's my Monday morning coffee routine is who's building what today.
Nice.
Steve, were you gonna make a comment?
Yeah, just on this point here about general business along the frontage road, and I apologize if I just missed it. I guess I'm just a little concerned, and I know that the exact location of the frontage road isn't solidified yet, but from what I see on the zoning map, it's, you know, it's already all like highway commercial there, so I guess I just don't understand why would it be changed to general business when my understanding is that, you know, highway commercial would allow anything that general business allows. Would that
Well,
mean, yeah,
That's a good
please-
question. There would be a process in the future land use plan. There would be recommendations for actually making those zoning districts much more distinct and having highway commercial really just be like, when we look at the future land use designations, when if you pull those up there,
Yep.
those are actually, that's actually showing those zoning districts as pretty distinct. And so you would actually have more, like in general business, you would have more like personal services, professional services, things like that, that wouldn't be allowed in highway commercial, and highway commercial would just be reserved for auto related or auto dependent, sorry, and auto related, more intensive commercial uses, like the auto repair shops and the towing and impound lots and gas stations, those kinds of things that are much more appropriate for something called highway commercial. And then
Gotcha.
yeah, so there would be some future changes to the land use code in the use table would actually, we'd be modifying those districts in order to make them more distinct from each other.
Gotcha. Yeah, sorry, I was not looking at the updated definitions there. So that's helpful. So would that be, I mean, would this be the one area that might be considered more of like a down zone from someone who has highway commercial now if they were then changed to general business or general
I mean,
commercial?
I guess it depends on what you think of. I don't know if it would be considered down zoning. I mean, if you think that a fuel station or an auto repair shop has more value than, you know, other types of commercial uses, you know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah, and I just look at it through, you know, ultimately if someone has, you know, because highway commercial, like that's a really permissive zone. And so if someone has that and then all of a sudden they're looking at, well, I can do less things with it, inherently that's less valuable. And I just bring that up because, you know, if that really is the case, and you know, I'd have to look at the land use table to really look at that and assess that. But I'm just bringing that up because I would imagine there's going to be a ton of pushback on that, like vociferous pushback from highway commercial owners.
And that's something that still has to just be fleshed out, is like, what do we want highway commercial to be more limited in terms of it's what's entitled in, or does it matter that much? Should we just keep most of the uses being allowed in highway commercial? But then you're, you know, yeah, I guess it's a little bit tricky because we're almost like retroactively like making these zoning districts make sense, because I don't feel like they really make sense right now. They're just not very distinct.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Okay, I'm gonna go to my talk, but this is kind of funny, I'm not actually probably as prepared as I should be, but one of the other items that we talked about was extending water protection source overlays to Castle Valley. Possibly to Spanish Valley. This proposal gets kicked around, but I really think I want to give enough detail to get some feedback. So this actually came about because I'm on the water, what do we call it? So anyway, we're the water committee for Castle Valley, and we sat down and we said, gee, how does the state protect us? How does the BLM protect us? How does the Forest Service protect us? How does the county protect us? And we realized the county doesn't protect us at all, though BLM has no surface occupancy. You can't drill wells and gas wells in BLM land in the Castle Valley watershed. And the new Forest Service plan basically has the Moab geographic area, which has extra protections. No one, those two groups covering most of the acreage that we have in our watershed are going to be doing belting. And it turns out that the county does have a water protection source overlay. It has it on the Spanish Valley side in its aquifer. And that is kind of limited, and you have a very nice slide on how limited it is. It'll happen kind of around the big wells that the city has and Gwissa stuff. And we can't do that in Castle Valley because we are measly water providers. We say, hey, you know, you can put your straw into the water, your well, and take water out of the well, out of our aquifer, and you can do so much of that. But we aren't a water supplier. We don't send water through pipes to people. So we don't qualify for the water protection zones that the state has. Now, these are two separate things. The state has its water protection zones, and the county has, in addition to these certain areas that I think are now up on the map, has said, whoa, if you build in that area, you start out building only at half the density max. You might have to do a water study, and you basically have to come in front of the county commission and get this approved. So it's a legislative decision. So Trish and I at one point went over and talked to Elisa and Dan Stenta and just talked about it. But you have to be careful here because this can sound like a one-word change. The change looks something like this on this side. It says, hey, you know, there's the EPA sole source aquifer. And those areas that are protected by the state, we're going to put over this water protection source overlay. So the water protection source overlay and its rules about building to half the density, etc., are done by the county, and then the state has its own regulations, right? We can't do that. Now, here's the problem. It's more than changing the word to the EPA sole source aquifer and this designation that the state gives, because these are much different areas. The sole source aquifer is the entire aquifer for the Glen Canyon area. However, when we went over and now going back to Castle Valley, the thought was, well, could we protect the sole source aquifer by simply saying the sole source aquifer or these areas that are protected by the state? So this would really be a county initiative to protect what is 24,000 acres of land. Well, be careful. Much of that land is BLM. Much of that land is Forest Service. There's one 480-acre parcel of Sitla land, which is going to be a controversy. in itself, but really was not what I first thought about when I thought about trying to do this, because I was still working on well, what could the county do for us. There's Willow Basin, a few houses up there. There's Castleton, some houses up there, and some other private properties. So I don't know where this leaves us. Of course, ideally, I'd like to say, look, this is an EPA designated sole source aquifer. It's the only source of drinking water for Castle Valley. To be an EPA sole source aquifer, you have to have 50% or more of your drinking water come from that source. The Forest Service and BLM protect this land fairly nicely. Could the county do it? So I just want people to understand this proposal because I don't think the county commissioners much understood it when it was brought up at this same workshop. And some people in Moab might like the same thing for their sole source aquifer. Where the county commission stands and where planning commission stands, I don't really know. I've asked my son who does GIS, and this is one of the first steps I think in it. Do me a map that looks at the Castle Valley aquifer, tell me what's Sidla property, what's private property, what's BLM, and what's Forest Service. He, who is a whiz at GIS, says, I'll do it in an afternoon because they know how to do such things. Certainly that's an important aspect of it. And I'm actually someone who likes to say only a few words, so I'm shutting up now.
Thank you for that explanation. That's good, Opie. Do you have anything to clarify on that?
Well, I mean, it was just something that was brought up to me years ago. And we started with our old county attorney to work on that. And then when she was not reelected, had a fund, put aside for Laurel Hagen to finish that work, and then that's where it's at. So
Yeah,
I don't.
There's quite a bit of research and work that she did provide.
Right.
And I've been meaning to go back and look at how much further the changes would go based on her recommendations.
Right.
What were the reasons for those changes? Instead of just this one little change that we could do that would just apply the EPA aquifer for Castle Valley to the same standards that we have now.
Right. But this might be a start, and then if we can return somehow to Laurel's work and.
Yeah, I would like to find out more I haven't been in that folder for a while to look at what she was discussing in that work.
I mean, I will say that how it came to me was an engineer with a private water firm was surprised that we didn't have these protections. And so he approached me. It was an individual that works a lot in Grand and San Juan County. So
yeah, I think this is.
I probably should add, there's a lot of water protection in the Salt Lake City area. So many of their canyons are protected. Now they've done it kind of cooperatively. One time we looked at the two watersheds, I think it's like 1.7%, something like this. No, of course I will be quoting because I'm online here, but it might be 1.7% of all of the property in Grand County are in these two watersheds. And it's got to be 95% of the population or more water source. It's the only reason, of course, we have these population centers.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, so that is definitely still on the list as far as including that in this update for the short time that we have to.
But I certainly want feedback if possible about the problems we might have or whatever.
Yeah, I feel like it's like this simple word change. Oh yeah, okay. But I'm like, What do you mean by half development? Does that mean like, every application of housing like goes down, like, I'm like, whoa, is this a bomb? Like, I would want a list of like everything that means, and I'm just kind of like, I'm like, I know this is like a Castle Valley thing, but what's their, you gotta say like, oh, well, we just want to protect our drinking water, but are we trying to like kind of exclude areas from being built? Like what? I'm just kind of, like that's a huge implications of that, and I'm just like, I mean, I'm in for like protecting our drinking water. It's like we got that, but what's that mean?
Well, it is,
Like, when
I
you say
mean,
half
she's going to,
I'm just kind
she's
of.
gonna put it up there, but basically, these are these.
I've got to pull the trigger on the elephant. A lot of that
Yep.
land is Sitla land, and if you ask Sitla, county zoning ordinances, all this stuff does not apply to Sitla land. I know that you disagree with that. I haven't made up my mind legally on that topic, but we do need to just say that out loud.
Yeah.
That this is mainly going to affect a lot of Sitla land, and Sitla, at the end of the day, is going to say, no, it doesn't. Actually, we can elect to ignore this forever.
So let me do two things here. Absolutely, this is of course the teeth in this particular thing. We did do it when somebody wanted to build a resort in the water protection zone up on the golf course. Right. And they were limited to have density, and to start, that's the maximum they can build at. And then I think we maybe suggested they do a watershed study. That thing hasn't come back to us. Sitla, we may disagree, but so far, Sitla has never chosen, this is my understanding, to say we can build anything we want and ignore county zoning. They may at some point do it. This could be something that could push them to do it. It'd be a test case. Wouldn't be a bad test case, but they'd be pushing it in a watershed that has sole source aquifer protection. Doesn't mean they would win, but would be one of those cases where somebody would listen probably closely to the arguments on both sides.
I would say,
Always says,
my point in bringing that up is that I would ask, okay, what's the bomb? It seems like, what's the bomb? That's the bomb. And it like the Trust Lands Administration has, to wit, never just blatantly disregarded major substantial planning and zoning decisions, ordinances, things like that. But there are plenty of times where in other, Sitla does flex that muscle in little ways, lots of times. The color of the roof on a commercial use that's being developed in a certain area of a certain county. There's, there is absolutely no question at the state courts level of interpreting the titles in the UCA that Sitla will win that. Guaranteed. It's what the law says very explicitly in plain English. Although, the zoning of does not apply to lands owned by the state.
it is an interesting thing, because the judge on Lionsback said that basically it was questionable whether a leasing could do whatever they wanted to do because they were leasing from Sitla. And of course, the question that I think really would go against Sitla, I'm sure Sitla can't sell land to somebody and the person saying, hey, I bought it from Sitla. So then the leasing is a very interesting question.
Yeah, that's a great point. The leasing thing is still fun.
Yeah, so I just was pulling up the section on this overlay, the WSPO. It's section 4.5 in the land use code if you want to go read it. But my one concern would be, and this would probably be something I'd want to propose changing, is that this sentence right here that says all uses shall be conditional uses. And that seems a little like extreme, because if somebody is just wanting to build a house.
Yeah.
That would be considered a residential use, and then it would fall under, and so it would be strange to have to go to commission to get a conditional use permit just to build your house. So I think what we would wanna do instead is to make that exception in here that certain things would be just would need to meet these standards. We would still want, to make sure that there's, the certain things about the disposal systems and septic, and that those things are met in the construction of that home. But that, anything like a subdivision over however many lots or something, or any commercial development over a certain square footage or something would have to get the conditional use permit. So I think just being a little bit more specific with the language there would be best. Don't recall that.
I don't recall either. I would assume it was both, when I started, yeah.
I'll have to look back into that, and maybe it would be a good thing to have her come to the planning commission and.
Yeah.
And just present those materials.
Yeah.
In her own words, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if she ever, like, I know that there was a bit of money set aside, and if she actually used up all that money, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that,
We can bother her. Oh,
I can kind of prompt that, like, I'll just, like with you, and just to kind of keep us moving.
And the other bomb, of course, is always property owners. What do they, in general, think of this? Because it does put a restriction on that property. It's a restriction that's been placed by the county before on some property, but this would be extending it. So
I would assume, like, because especially, we were kind of talking about the Moab source and the Castle Valley source, but specifically in the Castle Valley thing, to like move forward on this, it would be nice to see some sort of recommendation or opinion position from Castle Valley City. Is Mayor out there, Mayor Jasmine, somebody from the city, just saying like, we generally like have consensus and consent.
Right.
Because this is one of those kind of things, and I am sensitive to like, this is larger than the municipality of Castle Valley, so it is a county issue, but it also very exclusively affects just the city of Castle Valley. And so.
Well, it wouldn't affect land use permits, development applications that the city of Castle Valley processes themselves, yeah.
Correct, but it certainly does affect Castle Valley and absolutely does not affect Thompson.
Oh,
is
yeah.
my point.
Right.
And so because
of the.
it's a singular touchstone, it would be,
and actually
good fit.
Seventh Day Adventist is a pretty large property owner out there right next to Castle Valley.
Precisely.
Another group to check in with.
So this is kind of what I'm thinking of it, Jerry, because like you seemed, or you're into this. I don't, I'm like, what's the steel man of it? Like, I wouldn't know, like, I was reading that and I was looking into stuff and I was like, I mean, it's easy to be like, yeah, you don't want to contaminate your water, but I also like, don't want it to be like, oh, we're just anti-development and this is something we can throw at it to drain the cogs of the machine, right? Like, that's definitely like, a tactic. It's so like, I'm just trying to see like what we want to get is what I would like to see. Neither like I just want to see like the proper action. So like I just want to know, what do you think the steel man be a little bit against this?
Say I'm not sure exactly what you're after, but
well, I'm saying like what would be anti-OB say?
Oh, right? What would anti-OB say?
Dark OB.
It is a good question. It'll be hard to play that role, but I'll try to play it in just a second. What the EPA does is say no federal funds are gonna be used in this area unless we review it, right? It's clear the EPA is concerned about development in this area. And again, both the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management are. The only thing I think people might say is we've got private property and we should be able to develop it the way we see fit, according to the standards that we have right now and the zoning right we have right now. And we think we can do it well enough that we wouldn't hurt your watershed. We think the septic systems that we put in would be just fine to put in. The health department's going to agree with them that they can put in these septic tanks. So I think it would be an argument probably for private property rights and that they know what they're doing. Kind of arguments, that's the arguments you typically get with people developing. I literally started this not because there's an under canvas proposal up for the Sitla land that's above us. I literally, in my case, did it because I thought, well, there's no water protection for us. I guess Laurel Hagen did it far earlier than under canvas. Under canvas has, there's a group in Castle Valley. I've tried to stay out of their planning of it. The one thing I have done is say, here's the rules if you're going to ask for a rezone, because of course those are the same one the developer uses. Say, was it a zoned in error, etc. So I've tried to stay out of that. Under canvas may or may not have other problems with it, but I think people don't like to have to shift their property rights, understandably. So for people who sat near the wells, for the city well, didn't like having their density cut down. I think the area needs protection, but they may think we can do business as usual and things will work out. EPA and the state will agree. The area needs protection. Yes.
I think what I would, this isn't really devil's advocate. This is my, let's ask every single question kind of thing. What risks to water yield and water quality from development can the county mitigate that are not already being mitigated by the feds in the state? What protection is gained with this change to county ordinance that the state and the feds aren't going, isn't already going to pull a lever or sound a klaxon somewhere at water quality? The EPA, that's a gimme. They're not going to spend. They're not spending any federal money on private land in Castle Valley anyway. So the EPA one's kind of
they don't. But yeah, exactly. I mean, they don't give us protection, but they do with any kind of federal projects that go on federal land. Well, it is the case that there is an E. coli danger, which already has been found, and I think it's mainly. Okay, help me. Who leads them up?
Arnie.
Arnie, yes, I lost Arnie's name. Arnie has found, so that he's actually kind of informed the town of Castle Valley that this is a potential problem. Again, it does look like both BLM and the Forest Service don't think that surface disturbance and occupancy is good for the watershed. And that's this OM area, the geographic area that the Forest Service did. The reason they chose the two aquifers, one on the Castle Valley side and one on the Spanish Valley side, is because they think these protections need to be made for water quality. May not share that concern.
And I think it would be maybe beneficial to have somebody from DEQ to also explain, like, what we have in our WSPO land use code and our standards, our district standards, would that be, what do we require that's over and beyond what they already would require in their review or the health department's review of the septic systems that would be going in to support any development out in that area? Because I mean, I would be curious. I don't fully understand what the differences are between those two.
For my edification, Alyssa, in your process, like someone comes to build single family residence on private lot. And they're getting through the planning and zone, whatever you do. Is there a checkbox that's like, oh, you're in the DEQ source water protection zone, I've got to call, it's not Amy Haas, or like you've got to go call them and come back to me with a letter? Is there something like that?
You mean well, right now it's just the Moab, the Glen Canyon aquifer, that's protected through our WSPO section.
No, I meant through the
Oh,
state
just
thing.
in our,
What level
okay,
of
so
state
you're
coordination
talking
is
about
with
like
DEQ?
anywhere outside in the outlying areas of the county? What
I mean,
is our process for?
like where Obi's talking about it, Castle Valley, I'm gonna build a house. Is there any level of coordination between DWQ, because the houses are getting built, DWQ doesn't know.
Well, they start with
Legislature.
Orion,
Right.
and then I think he just refers to us to DEQ. I can't remember exactly. I don't think he signs off on the septic. Maybe he does. I'm getting kind of confused. There's definitely a certain level of development, like if it's a certain number of occupancy or whatever, then it does go up to the DEQ for sure. I know that. But I think for just single family homes, it might just be Orion.
Right, and that's the question, is like, if there's this DEQ source water aquifer protection thing, but development in that DEQ source water aquifer protection zone is not being declared to DEQ, then what's the point? So
Right.
that, I think, is an argument in favor of Obi's thing. Is that like, if no one's picking up the phone and calling DEQ, then that's cute. That's a cute coloring book you've got there. But
Well,
like,
yeah, I think, I want to say that's where Orion would, during the will serve process.
Yeah.
He would catch that if it was development that was happening in the DEQ's protection area, then he would refer to
Gotcha.
DEQ. I'm pretty sure that.
I assume that there would be. I was looking for that. Like, what does this change gain us that the state already doesn't? That's the one thing that I can come up with. It's like, if we're already pulling the lever and the state is getting informed, then
But the
let the DEQ do their job.
there is no DEQ protection overlay in that Castle Valley area. That's the thing that's lacking.
This is this,
What was the map?
The EPA, it's only the EPA.
would have been this, it would have been the Spanish Valley.
Well, so how can it be and the DEQ one if there is a DEQ one?
There only is a DEQ designated area for the Glen Canyon aquifer. So let me go back to that now.
Yeah.
And the reason is that we only provide water through wells
You're not.
and we're not a supplier, yeah.
That's what that
We-
means.
Yeah, so
we are
this
square
map,
peg.
this is the DEQ's,
This is the map that I need.
and it doesn't have anything out here in Castle Valley.
I understand. Okay, so that's what.
So
Is
that's
there-
why we'd be relying on.
Is there actually, can we go back to that?
They're actually,
Seen it on Professor Valley Ranch, and that source water there,
well, there's
there's a few little dots.
yeah, there's
Oh, God.
there's actually, as Dan Stenta pointed out, the church,
Yeah,
our church has a dot around it because it
serves.
supplies water to 20 or more people a
Yep.
certain number of days during the year. Therefore, it
Right.
qualifies as water.
And that alluvial fans, the kind of touch point, I know we do fuel reduction work in there. That goes right up to Route 128. I'm just wondering, like, I like protecting water. This is my thing. And the complete picture to me will be informed by, like, why are those so small and Moab's so big? They're relatively, like, by acreage, the same size watershed.
Right,
So what's the discrepancy there?
right.
Why is that different? If they had just never looked at it, it'd be a much easier sell to say, well, they're not doing anything. But they've looked at it and made those decisions for specific reasons.
So that might be a good, like, let's all reach out to you to reach out to Laurel and see how far she got.
Mhm.
You know, it's feasible. She kind of has that background
There's
or not.
something hydrologic there that they saw that we don't
Right.
have that document. Right?
Yeah.
And I
have
I
her.
don't mean to throw the EPA thing out of out the window. And I am not a hydrologist with letters behind my name. I work in this, and the EPA's layers, I think, while providing an excellent coverage of protection, are also the EPA's process very perforated legally. They didn't go through that with a fine tooth comb. Just because it's a larger and more expensive federal agency does not necessarily imply more accurate, more legal proof, more robust and precise data. And so I wouldn't want to get let's do this the right way. And I've done this a bunch of times. Oh, there's this big federal data set, but it's granular. It's very low resolution data set. That's the way with wildland fire mitigation. That's why the state is spending so much money drawing more precise polygons, to use the term of art.
Yeah.
We've got fancy polygons in there, and that was informed by more data than what the EPA.
Yeah, usually the more local, agency that you have working on something,
Precisely.
the more detailed it's gonna be, yeah. Yeah, so we'll
Yeah.
dig down to that a little bit more. And it could be that this becomes a little bit more of a in-depth process that, depending on the timing of that, it could be like a phase 2 land use code update versus. Right.
I've volunteered because I'm the one asking the question. I volunteered to find some time if someone from DWQ and Laurel wanted to
Okay.
explain it,
Okay.
and Jerry
Okay.
did, I'll report back and
Yeah.
put it in layman's
I'll
terms.
put you in on that.
I'm not
kinda-
handing out a sentence.
Yeah,
I'll
no.
take on a sentence.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good.
That topic is over, but thank you very much. Land use code updates. Yes, we still have the CUPs.
Yeah, so I've been working on whittling down our list to try to come up with a more just a refined list of updates that seem very critical to make within the 180 days that we have, which is ending in August. So
We
we'll
have 60
see.
days.
Something like that, yeah. So I'm working on the timeline to, it's really gonna be tight, I don't know. There's probably gonna this list is probably gonna get a little smaller even now, between now and when we actually get down to brass tacks and have public hearings. But I think that the CUPs is definitely one of those that's at the top of the list still. So, I don't know how much we wanna get into the table to this evening and go, I had planned to kind of leave that open as far as getting feedback during the meeting, or if you just want to have time to look at what changes I've already proposed. And I've tried to just highlight areas in green. It is hard to see this table.
I've still got this window up on my computer. I'm absolutely not ready to dive into this
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, it's a lot. So I would almost suggest at this stage that we just continue to get, if you want to give me feedback via email, or we can have a sit down, you could come to our office and we could just talk for 30 minutes and bring up your points of arguments of why you would want to, advocate for certain CUPs to go away or keeping some of them.
Alicia, I just had a general question. I think that's a great idea. How often are these CUPs used?
More and more, it
Are they
seems,
getting
actually.
more and more?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just feel like we are getting more applications. I feel like there's an increase in activity in general since I've been here.
I mean, I would imagine that the fact that, which they're very hard to deny, makes it a fairly, intriguing,
Yes.
for people. to
Yeah,
come.
I would definitely reiterate just keeping that in mind, like be thinking in framing the CUPs and thinking like, would we want to possibly allow this in the end? Would we be okay allowing it with conditions, or would we really just not want to permit this use at all in a certain zone? So some of the low hanging fruit that we've already talked about is like the outfitter guy, in a rural residential zone. So that's already been, I think there's pretty good consensus with that one. Having the hospitals, clinics and medical facilities in residential zones. I don't know why those were considered in originally, but maybe it was because there was a need for areas for that. We have them permitted in general business and highway commercial, so that seems like appropriate. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring up some of those really basic ones. If anybody has any objections right now to any of that.
Are things like chiropractic,
Yeah, so
massage therapy, physical therapy grouped into the hospital medical thing?
I was wondering that myself. I think that would go under like a clinic. Or personal service, yes. Because this is like a medical facility versus a commercial. It's under this public and civic uses category. So I think if we had like a chiropractor or massage therapy or yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
that
my
kind of thing.
massage therapist is board driven and publicly funded,
Right, so exactly, so that's where you would go down here in the commercial use categories and you would look at personal services.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down to have, schedule some meetings with folks if you want, or just have a phone call even. So you can do it that way or email.
Or even email with any that we find concerned.
Yes, emailing is great.
Should we set a deadline?
Yes, that's
That's
great.
right.
It is a
That's the one thing we should do.
Next Friday.
Explain to me your
Yeah,
color
that's good.
code on that map real quick.
Oh, I
looking
was
at that.
I just was highlighting some of the areas that I really want people to look at and
Green
focus on.
was like new, and then a cross out was like change, and then red was like.
Well, green is, I think I was only using and just, see this one, I should put this in green. But this was, I guess I colored this differently because this is the major utilities we were talking about. And we had discussed that would go into an overlay. Major utilities would actually just come out of the use table altogether across all of this entire, actually it would be this entire area here. So, but otherwise it's just, the green just stands for, I'm just trying to highlight areas we need to be looking at.
Okay, so she wants any comments by Friday. What do you think?
Today's just Monday, so that.
How's that? And if you don't want to make comments?
But so what would give you enough time to summarize comments for our next meeting? 'Cause that's probably what we ought to do is get comments and then discuss.
Yes, time for the next meeting,
Yeah.
for sure.
So that
And,
would give
oh, the red is where I've added a P. So I'm basically setting this up as like a red line So anywhere where the C is strike, there's a strike through, that would be removing it.
Okay.
And then anywhere where you're adding something would be in red.
Then what was the green highlight?
The green is just areas that I'm like, we should really have a talk.
Oh,
Should talk
okay.
about this. Where I'm kind of like, it's not as clear,
Okay, that's
you
what I
know,
was.
it's not as
there's some
obvious,
green.
yeah.
I was looking at.
I've already made some changes and then highlighted in green, and some of them I haven't because I'm not sure. But I think like college or university, I would think that those should be strike through, right?
So you just want folks to send you like a little bullet point of stuff that they're
Yes,
concerned about.
a list or,
List.
yeah.
I had a thought. I think that really dependent, to get my eye for a second, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
College or university, maybe it's just an allowable use if you're talking about the academic institution of the college or university. The college or university is gonna have a sports field. Maybe you wanna require a conditional use permit for some Friday night lights. So my thing is, and this is the same with the outfitters, longer list. Because it's like.
Yeah,
you
to
know,
have more nuance.
more
different
longer list
scale.
in general, just as a note for highlight every single cell. Is like college or university, what kind of college or university is an institute, like, you know, that, what is.
Yeah, not to
Is the U gonna come down here? I'm sorry.
yeah.
Like-
Not to be too critical, but like USU was on rural residential up until like, just to strike that out, I was like, hold on a second, that's like, it was on rural residential land, like, just to take that
Right.
out. Flip it, like, I don't know,
Yeah,
I'm sympathetic that conditional use permits are a huge burden, like.
well, and it's not really, I don't want it to really come down to the burden on staff. It's just, it's really trying to think about for property owners and developers and residents to all have expectations of what can and can't, or what should or shouldn't be.
Yeah, about the uses, not the conditional use permits. Yeah. It's about what uses make sense.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately, if you have a conditional use permit for multifamily residential zoning for a college or a university, then it's not MFR anymore. It's like a more of a civic center or a civic use in that those, you know, I guess.
it's funny, I always have mine, when I look over this whole thing, I'm always like, rural residential is almost more like anything goes. Like, in my mind, but it's not, I get it. I'm always surprised at how restrictive that is instead of permissive. But hey, that would be,
I mean, it's you know, it's our lowest, well, not our lowest, but our almost lowest zone for residential neighborhoods. And you have to also be thinking about, you know, the traffic that that's the other thing that goes through my mind is all of the impacts that come with these kinds of uses. They're not going to be necessarily mitigated. Like the traffic that would come along with a college or a university.
Yeah, going back to the future land use map, it just just makes sense. You know, for where, you know, where USU is now makes sense. You're right. At one point it was zoned rural residential, maybe it was range and grazing. I don't know what it was,
yeah,
but it makes sense for it to be there, right? Because it's directly connected to 191. But when you shove it in the middle of something where it takes a mile to get to some artery, then it doesn't make sense.
well, the question too is like, well, that whole area is surrounded by rural residential, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
you know, the deal, it's not gonna get expanded, but let's say they did, oh, well, it's not in there. So move to it.
The linchpin here, the keystone, is that it is conditional use, right? I don't think I like the matrix. We use this, I think I mentioned before, I use an exactly like same kind of matrix in making land use decisions in waterway or river, like allowable, potentially allowable, we gotta dive into this, or like, no, just, you know, requires a plan revision, you're not gonna get. So I like like the land use matrix, but I also like particularly land use matrix C, that's what I have. I like the CUP matrix, but it's like, if it's on this list in the first place, it is already a not great fit for anything. That's the point, it's conditional, it's not like that. When I think conditional use, like, yeah, we're adding conditions to a permit, but we're adding conditions to the permit because there are exacerbating conditions in the real world that require us to get creative with permitting.
Right.
And so like,
Yeah.
like, this is, I think, not a time to simplify, streamline. This is a time to embrace, like, oh, this is big and messy and dumb, and like leaning toward, if you've got an entire like detention center not permissible at all, that's a great example, because I think we've got the jail we need. So like, that doesn't belong on the list. But like, if there is any possibility that there could be an allowable use, like, institutions, all institutions, maybe in range and grazing. What does that even mean? But not in residential. It's like there's, you could like detail, like way more detail, like educate.
We do, yeah, so in the code, you can get into the details of all of
The
these
use
general
standards, right?
uses,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
You can get,
from what I understand,
But-
you guys
but-
are going down this because, like, it's basically the CUP has evolved into a thing, well, like, it's gonna pass unless they're used,
I honestly
right? So
think
it's almost like a permit.
my
That's where the-
my
it's
understanding is that the CUPs there were so many of them put in place back in the day.
Yeah.
As a way to, there was a time when you could use a CUP as like more of a discretionary decision, where you could say, we're not gonna approve it, we're just gonna deny it. And it was almost like a tool to, because they didn't necessarily know if it would be, if that use could be allowed wherever it was being proposed in that zone. They weren't really sure, so they didn't want to say yes or no and kind of leave the door open, but then be able to have the power to say no.
Right,
But
that-
now we can't say no to CUPs in general. I mean, sometimes there could be some reasons if, like the general plan is one of those that we've had, used in the past. Consistency or inconsistency with the general plan. But I think that they were used as a tool, like kind of,
if you promise you play good, we'll let you say, like, oh, if you do this thing, then it's okay, right? Kind of.
in my mind, CUPs should only be in place for things that you would be okay with the use ending up in that zone. Ultimately, you're pretty much okay with it, but you just want to make sure that there's mitigating conditions to lessen the impacts.
And as
But
time's gone by, it's gotten stripped, so like, why don't we just strip it back, is that kind of the gist of the whole thing?
Yeah, now that we're basically, we're coming from the mindset of, we're not gonna be able to deny these things. Most of the time, we're not gonna be able to deny these uses, so let's just be really careful where they are allowed as CUPs currently.
Yeah, what I see, it's like, it almost needs to like, I kind of like, well, I mean, do you just take them all out and redo your permits? But that's huge, right? Anyways. I mean, it's just kind of, it comes down to the state strips us power, so we gotta like fight back, like where we
Well,
see appropriate.
And I also think though that that's why you have good zoning, like I just feel like our zoning has been a little, it was very kind of broad brushes, like all rural residential, and then a strip entire commercial. And there's a few little things going on, but when you look at other places' zoning maps, they're very, like, they're broken up. There's like lots of little pockets of this and that are allowed, and there's reasons for it, because you want to, there are certain uses that are very impactful for residents is that you wouldn't want to have them right next to each other.
Yeah.
But we just, that's,
Well, it also
we're
turns
struggling.
CUP into like a legislative decision of allowing something, right? Like that's kind of the whole thing. It's like, okay, you'll do it if you get permission of this thing, right? And that's kind of originally was the idea.
And I think that they thought that there was more power in denying something, the ability to deny a
Right.
CUP. Yeah.
That's not a,
Do you feel like the overlays would go that direction eventually? I mean, is that the right question to ask?
You mean like if we were gonna take major utilities and put that in an overlay? if
No,
it would
like I
be-
just wonder, like we have overnight accommodations and it's like, I just see things get chipped away from a different angle. It's like,
Oh, you mean
well,
like,
you can't do that, you know, so.
like the state legislature?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think overlays are overlays. They're zoning, it's a zoning tool,
Okay.
legislative.
like, that's the whole concept, like there could be some conditional uses, but if you can prove mitigation, we're gonna allow it. It is the truth, like, that's the way it works with endangered species and the Fish and Wildlife Service. You file an HCP, Habitat Conservation Plan, and then,
Yep,
you'll-
mitigate all those, yeah.
So, this is not a problem that's unique to the county level, or shaking your fist at the state legislature for taking away our tools. It's just that, this is like a linchpin of land use planning is like, if you're like specifically those uses that have just one P or just one C, those are the ones that catch my attention immediately,
Mhm.
because that doesn't sound very nuanced to me. As the
Right.
zoning changes, there's like, as residential density gets tighter, large impacts, you want to see more Cs on the matrix in the direction of higher density. But when we have a use and there's just one C out there in a random, like, where that's not cogent, it's like that flow from density and housing density and impacts to values. So I look for those things. I only have like one or two, and ask myself, is this one of those uses that, just shouldn't like be not allowed at all, taken off the list and addressed in some other part of the land use code entirely, like airport, heliport, and emergency operations for pass. Why is that only permitted in that one zone specifically, right? Like, and so that's the theory behind the way I approach these little matrices. Is like, I can see private airport and heliport being conditionally allowable just in rural region grazing. Professor Valley Ranch has got the airstrip, right? That one makes sense, but those ones are the ones I look at on a case by case basis and be like, we're talking about the EOC and Canyonlands Field. Like, we've already got them. If we've got them and we're happy with them, let's, not allow that there be the potential to dedicate another 5,000 acres to a second airport. Like, that is the only thing that of the CUP matrix does for us is leave it open in that one. I'm not even sure what HC specifically, highway commercial. Helicopter landing pad on the highway commercial stuff. Okay. What, like?
You have it, right?
Well, yeah, the sheriff's, yes.
right.
And that's already, the sheriff's, there's
And it's that, yeah,
but we've got the one we need.
Mhm.
What, how many more do
Right.
we want?
Yeah, I mean, and maybe those are good candidates for, maybe that's another good candidate for an overlay. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's some legal reason why, like, you would have to put a P or a C somewhere for a use. Just, there
Right.
could be,
Next example is like all other parks and open areas are permitted across all uses. So
Mhm.
you know. It's never gonna need a CUP, why is it on matrix? If we're gonna keep that, no edits to it. Right, P's across the board. Right, so like taking out the stuff that does need to be there, and then adding
Well, so
detail.
if you take something out, it actually usually means that it's not permitted. Like, if we don't list something in here, we can't allow it.
I see,
So that's why,
that's a fundamental misunderstanding.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying. If you, like, I'm gonna be going through this, and you're like, this is creates problems. Let's look at this. That's it.
it's like we don't have a category for event center or an event, like a conference, conference center or an event space. So we have to say no right now. Say no to people. Have to make it fit a different description. It's hard to
And this part of, so I guess I should clarify, you're asking us to look just at the permitted, conditional, or not allowed. We're not tweaking use category and specific use column are not on the table right now, because I think that's what this needs most.
I think it does, and I think that might be more appropriate after we get through the future land use plan and then do the subsequent land use code update.
I misunderstood
No, that's
which
okay. I
columns
mean,
were
it's
in
tempting.
bounds,
It's tempting
but
to
that's
wanna
where
add,
it needs to happen.
I know. It is
I
tempting to add
apologize
stuff
for
in.
that. I was harping on
And
that.
as we get, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is tempting when you're like considering removing a CUP for something, but then you're like, well, but wouldn't we wanna allow it for something, a smaller scale version of it? That's, I know, I see where you're going with that, so, I mean, I think if it's, it could be something to just put on the list, and maybe it can't get done this round, but yeah, flag it for sure. See, Steve, do you have anything?
Docs part. I'll
to
go
add?
through it. Like you can, you're gonna be okay. Like if I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go through. I was kind of going through, but you'll be able to read those.
Uh-huh,
Okay.
Yeah.
It'll be froze. Okay.
Watch it.
You know how much I use computers.
No, there you go.
I have some that influence in my office, and you can draw lines. It's available. If you wanna use the spreadsheet that you're looking at, Erin, the Google spreadsheet, then I would just put comments in the box. So you could right click on any box and then say insert comment, and then write your little comment.
I got a request edit access.
I wanna say I gave everybody commenter access, not edit. I don't want people actually editing it.
Sorry.
I would make it comment. Okay.
Yeah, comments.
Can you download?
You could download it if you wanted to really, create your own version, and then, you could definitely, you could make a duplicate, or I think you can. You could definitely download it.
Okay, I got
Ready, ready for, I think, future considerations.
So I'm just gonna show you,
Oh, one more thing.
I'm just gonna show you like here, if you right click on any of these boxes, then you can say,
Yeah.
whoops,
Ah,
not insert,
comment. Gotcha.
yeah, insert comment. Yeah, and then you just, yep, and your comment will just kind of pop up whenever you hover over it. Like I have a comment on this one, Care Services Limited.
We had something unfinished.
We have something unfinished, Jerry tells us.
It's, the due date is that this Friday,
This Friday,
and we have at least, I guess Steve's on, but Mary is missing, so somebody should inform Mary she's got.
yes, I will let her know, for sure.
So
now I think there are no citizens to be heard. So I think we're ready for future considerations, which are listed nicely.
Yeah, so Katie, our Vista has been working on the outdoor lighting revisions and just comparing, again, like going through line by line and seeing what the city changed, and she's making a spreadsheet or matrix to show what they changed and what we could consider changing in our code. So we could go over that at our next meeting. Also, just wanted to give you guys an update because at one of our last future considerations, we thought that the rezone out at Thompson, the rezone request was going to be a public hearing at this meeting, but he is actually out of town. Property owner won't be in the area until July, so that's just on hold. And then just wanted to, remind everybody that we will be setting up some meeting times with the consultants. They'll be in town. I think we finally came to the conclusion that the 20th and the 21st were going to be the best dates. So hopefully that can work for everybody. We can we could even set up meetings where it's just like 2 or 3 of you, or you could do individual meetings with the consultants, but we'll be just one. Yeah. That's right. And I did get a lot of feedback from you all, so I've been tracking that. So we'll get that set up and scheduled, and then hopefully also we would have some red line versions of the land use code amendments sections with the proposed amendments ready to look at our next meeting.
When is your last day again?
The 28th.
Have you guys begun interviews?
No,
Okay.
we're really close to having some
Set up. Okay, good.
Yeah, we're working on scheduling those.
You'll just keep us up to date on that.
Yes. That's all
Now,
I've got.
on that question, what do we do for interim while you're gone? And the person that replaces you?
So Bryce, the new associate planner, is gonna kind of be taking my place in terms of trying to keep things moving forward with the land use code updates. And yeah, I mean, there'll probably be a little bit of a lag, but hopefully what I'm hoping is to have most of the updates in the red line versions already so that I can pass on to her. But she's getting all up to speed right now, so.
The other considerations. Motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Good
Thanks,
discussion.
everyone.
Good discussion. Smart kids.